The Semantic Web was an effort to mark up web pages with facts about their content. The dream was to enable computers to understand the world by reading these web pages, and potentially also enable smart agents that could automatically take action on that data.
If anybody's to take the crown of and title of Web3, it's probably the current crypto crowd, because they're trying to design systems with the correct incentives for a lot of different parties so that the entire thing would work. And because they had to do it from the beginning with an even stronger financial incentive, they've had to like work this stuff out and design what do they call token economics. The crypto people definitely are way savvier with this sort of stuff. And maybe if they did semantic web from in the late 90s and 2000s, we'd end up with something.
Hey, this is Sri.
And this is Will.
Welcome to the Technium, where we talk about the edge of technology and what we can build with it. An optimistic look at the road ahead. Hey, Will, how's it going?
Hey, Sri, how's it going with you? I think I'm okay. My voice is a little hoarse today, but other than that, I am good. So hopefully I'll last through this podcast, but I think we can run through it. But I have the original kelp flavor of Calpico, and this is kind of a citrusy, yogurty drink from Japan, and its original name was Calpis, which obviously wouldn't fly here, so they rebranded it to Calpico, which if you get a chance, I would suggest trying it. It's pretty good.
That's cool. On my end, I have this Lagunitas hop water. It is a beer-flavored beverage that is calorie-free and alcohol-free, so you get all the taste and aroma of beer, but actually none of the effects.
Really? I've never really gravitated towards the taste of beer. It took me a long time to appreciate the flavor of beer. You have to drink a lot of it. So apparently this is for people that already got there. They're kind of at the Jedi part of the curve for like taste of beer, I guess. So
yeah, it's definitely a niche product for a niche market. Right. I don't know. We'll see. I'm not a big super fan of beer or anything, but yeah. We'll see.
So what are we talking about this week?
This week we are talking about the Semantic Web. The Semantic Web was an effort to mark up web pages with facts about their content. The dream was to enable computers to understand the world by reading these web pages, and potentially also enable smart agents that could automatically take action on that data. So it was basically an effort to make the world's web pages easier for machines to understand so that they can make the users' lives easier.
Yeah, I remember this era because I think this was around the time when I guess came of age, you could say, or like started coming out into industry, and there was a lot of talk of the semantic web. And my sense at the time was this is really complicated and I don't really want to learn it, or I don't know where to make heads or tails of it. So I guess maybe I'm just kind of dumb, and so I'll do something else in the meantime. But apparently the semantic web came and went, and I think nowadays I feel like if something's more complicated than what I can kind of figure out, then I'm like, oh, this is probably not going to work. so but yeah, like what about you? Do you have any sense of, did you live through that kind of heady era of the semantic web?
I think I was still early on in my career, or not in my career. I was still growing up, but I was sort of a nerdy kid, and so I was following along without knowing too much about it.
Oh, okay.
So also, just to clarify for our listeners, this is a retro episode. So this is another retro episode.
Yeah, don't worry. It's not like it's yet another JavaScript front-end framework that you haven't heard about. You're like, I got to look this stuff up. Yeah, this is a retro episode. Congratulations. Yep. You can rest on your laurels now, so don't worry about it.
Just to sort of situate us in time, I think the semantic web was happening around the early to mid 2000s, if I remember correctly.
It's somewhere around there, yeah.
Yeah, and so this was at a time when I think .com era was done, right? Like there was the bust, but then there was increasing sort of rise of blogging, RSS, different variants of like semantically correct HTML or markup and this kind of thing.
Yeah, like the big startup at the time was like Blogger and Movable Type, and people were all about having backlinks and blog roles to link to each other's blogs, and that was kind of the era. And it was almost like Flickr-ish, but pre-Flickr. Maybe like Flickr came up at around the end of the semantic web sort of thing, and like Delicious, for those of you that remember, like Folksonomy and like what is
Yes.
it, the tags and whatnot. So that's
Yeah.
where tags started. But yeah, we're not talking about that. Maybe we'll make that sort of stuff another retro episode. But
Yeah.
anyways, that was when things were coming on the up and up. And the vision of semantic web, like Shri just said, was that if people marked up their web pages with meaning, then we could finally get intelligent agents to trawl the web for us to do our bidding no matter where our data was on the web. And so I think it is a pretty seductive vision. And I would have to say, even today, it's pretty seductive. Even though I think a lot of people have been burned by semantic web, there's still some hardcore people out there still like working on it. So
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. It is a very broad-reaching vision of what computers can do, and just to give a specific example, when we are talking about marking up web pages with facts and meaning, a good example is, let's say that you are the owner of a restaurant and you maintain your restaurant's website. Then you can imagine that to a human, they're able to navigate around your website and find things like your menu, your opening hours, the type of cuisine that you serve, et cetera, et cetera. But at that time that we're talking, that is not possible. That was not possible for machines to comprehend. So the idea was that as the maintainer of individual websites, they would add some markup that was not visible to the user, but was part of the HTML markup structure that would say, okay, this is a opening hours time, or this is the name of the restaurant, or whatever.
right,
This is the
or
location.
this is the address, so that the intelligent agent can tell you like where to drive to if
Yeah.
you make a reservation or something. See, that's where you went wrong, because like restaurant websites were horrible then and they're horrible now. So I can't imagine them like doing like even extra work to put markup on there. I don't know. But anyways, go on.
Yeah. Yeah, no. So that's what we mean by the facts. This all was happening at this period of the history of the web where the belief was that the web would be increasingly, I guess, participatory, that people would maintain blogs, maintain web pages. It was kind of this idea of the open web. This was before a lot of these aggregators, content aggregators like Yelp, Facebook, and Twitter started to subsume a lot of the information onto their walled gardens.
Yeah, like Facebook did not exist in this period. Google did, but their whole business model was getting people to other pages. So it wasn't yet a time where people were like aggregating content on their own sites. And so the idea was that these intelligent agents, if like the websites of restaurants were marked up with like what the address was and what the phone number was, then you can say to your agent, oh, I want to book a table. And then they could go to different websites and get, like, say, go to a chauffeuring website to like gather the information and set the appointment and match it up with the times that are available on the restaurant, like what open tables are available and that sort of thing. And because all that data is out there for agents to read and parse and put together, then they could do this sort of work for you. And for reasons we'll get to later in this episode, that's not the web that we got and turned out. So, but that was the vision of the smart agents and the intelligent agents browsing the semantic web. And yeah, so that hopefully that gives a clearer idea of where people's heads were at the time.
Yeah. So, the semantic web started out with that grand vision, and its trajectory was not, it did not meet those expectations. I think it's safe to say. And we can definitely go into the reasoning for that. But I think some things that immediately seem obvious now in retrospect are the fact that just the trajectory of the web took a very different turn, where people were no longer the webmasters, as they used to call them, of their own website for their restaurant or for their own blog. A lot of the content was pushed onto platforms, and it's generally not in the interest of those platforms to open up that content moat, right? So they want as many people, like Yelp would prefer that, rather than you have a smart agent that is booking tables at restaurants using the open web. I think it's a better revenue model for Yelp to provide that service for you and charge a commission to the restaurants or whatever. And so I think the shape of the web changed, and then I think there were also a lot of mismatches between the idealism of the semantic web pioneers and their beliefs in the incentives that people had in order to participate in this versus like
I
actual
wouldn't be
messiness of human reality.
Yeah, I wouldn't be so diplomatic. When I read back this, I was just like, they're just completely naive about it. And so maybe it's a good thing you're running the show on this episode, because when I read, I'm like, I lived through it early in my career, didn't really quite pay attention, but when you go back and read it, you're like, shaking my head. So
Yeah, I have a little bit of a soft spot / can't trash these folks too much, because some of my coworkers on a former team that I've worked on were very much steeped in this. They didn't necessarily work on the semantic web, but they were part of that whole culture, and so I understand where they're coming from. But yeah,
no,
I
I
agree
mean,
with you.
I think the idea itself is not flawed. I think what's flawed is the lack of understanding of how other actors would work in such a system, because in like a closed centralized system where you can control like the flow of information that you, or like the graph where you can like add and delete nodes, it totally, like, it's not a problem. And then so you can focus on like kind of the academic computer sciencey part of the problem. But like when you release it to the public, like, as we now know on the internet, like there's all sorts of unsavory people saying unsavory things. Even if you meet them in person, they're like perfectly amiable. Like there's a side of people that just likes to troll things. I don't know what it is, but like that, I think there was just a lack of understanding there, and so I think that's what it is. But like for me personally, I also find the vision seductive, but really like it's that practical, in order to get people to adopt things, like there's a certain shape to how people adopt things, and I think there was just no understanding of that at the time.
Yeah, definitely. And this is something I think we'll dive much deeper on later in this conversation.
Right.
Just to give a little bit also more background about the mechanics of how the semantic web would work, like I mentioned, there would be this invisible markup that was part of the HTML of these pages. It was written by the owners of the web pages. And you can imagine this is a distributed effort, right? There's no central authority. Everybody is maintaining their own web pages and are responsible for marking up that content. And so there needs to be some standard by which you are able to specify. There needs to be a standard of what tags to use, what the structure, the data format, how you, for example, represent a date, how you represent currency. There sort of needs to be a way to normalize the data so that it's actually understandable by computers, because of course if everybody could just mark up things however they wanted, then this might as well just have been natural language. And so a big part of the semantic web was standardizing what we call taxonomies or ontologies, which are basically ways of representing the world. So you have like a way of representing currencies, you have a way of representing locations, and there are many other entities. I'm only giving a few primitive types, but for example, in some visions of the semantic web, you would be able to have a markup representation of a person, and like then you'd be able to say this is their name, this is when they were born, this is their spouse, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Have you read some of these specs before?
No, actually, I haven't.
I've looked through them, and it's not fun reading, I guess. So there was a spec called Friend of a Friend, and they were trying to do semantic web for social networks. And like the idea was that people would be able to publish lists of their friends, and then you could have a decentralized social network, and you can carry that with you to whatever service, like give permission to different services to use it.
So on like your blog or something, you have this like friend of a friend markup and say these are all my friends.
Right. And so like if you sign up for a service with an intelligent agent, then maybe it can like find all your, I don't know, friends that work at Google or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Or to get tech support help, right?
Right.
I'm sure people would pay for that now. And so what do you call it? Where was I? Oh yeah, so that was like the idea. But like when you go read some of these specs, like they have specs and then specs on the specs, so that they eventually are self-describing, and it gets confusing really quickly. But so yeah,
were the specs also marked up so that machines could read them?
Yeah. Like it was all expressed in XML.
Wow.
So
Okay.
It's XML all the way down. Which like in some ways XML is impressive in that it's kind of like ends up looking like a Lisp with angle brackets. So
yeah. So like you're mentioning, somebody had to write these specs for everybody to use and to agree upon what it means to represent different types of things in the world. And a lot of this was dependent on standards bodies and working groups of computer scientists and other types of folks as well, ontologists and these types of folks who were responsible for creating these very exhaustive specifications that then everybody would have to follow. And I think that there are varying opinions on the role of standards in software, and I think that as in software protocols, and I think the current state of the world is almost like standards don't exist / don't really matter much. But I think this was at a time when people were very, very much trying to standardize everything and making, semantically correct HTML, XHTML, all kinds of ways of standardizing the web.
Yeah, I would say it's not everybody on the web, because definitely there were people shooting from their hips at the time. I would say it's probably specifically people whose study is all about, I guess, how to organize information, like librarians, study of like categorizing things, ontologists. I don't know, epistemologists. I can never say that word.
Epistemologists, yeah.
Yeah, something. Maybe did I get that right? I have no idea. So, but
Yeah.
yeah. But the idea is like, oh, okay, the web worked, so let's do the full blown version of the thing that we've been researching. So. Yeah, and so going back to what you were talking about, then, like that's kind of how it was mechanically with the specs. Like, did you ever try it out, or like have you seen it in the wild back then?
Yeah, I was following some of these efforts, and actually the name friend of a friend, I've never heard it said out loud / said in its full form, but like the acronym is FOAF, right? Like FOAF.
Yeah.
And I definitely remember seeing that because I was into blogging at that time. I think I was in high school or something, and I was setting up like WordPress, and there were like WordPress plugins and things for Semantic Web. And if you wanted these like pingbacks and FOAF markup and things like that. And so yeah, I mean, I would say I not only have I seen it.
For our audience, real quick, what's a pingback?
This was like a mechanism by which a website could almost to say, hey, I linked to your web page, and then you would have these lists at the bottom of like almost right above the comment section of the blog that said, oh, all of these things kind of referenced this on the web.
Right. It's kind of a hack to get bi-directional links on the web for a blog. So if somebody mentioned your thing, you get links on your page that somebody mentioned your thing. And so how that links to Semantic Web is that like you get that invisible semantic markup of like what this stuff is, so that hopefully some intelligent agent out there can make good use of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So anyway, I had seen it in the wild, but I've also, I suppose, participated in the Semantic Web in my own way as a person who ran a website around that time.
Right,
so
right.
yeah, I mean, I, as a person who hosts a technology podcast / likes to think about technology a lot, like I was enthusiastic because it seemed like a cool thing, and I was nerding out on it, but
no, I mean, I thought it was complex, but I thought it was me back then, and I also thought like, hey, as a citizen of the web, like let's just put some stuff up, and hopefully some good stuff will happen. So maybe this is the cynicism of being a cantankerous technologist or engineer that's showing through, because talk to any graybeard, which I'm not yet. You find them, they're a little curmudgeon-y. So then, are there like where were the roots for like Semantic Web? Like, did it have, like, I remember had some roots in AI. Is that the case?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of representing the world in terms of facts, sets of facts, is a very old idea rooted in AI, and our listeners might also remember something very similar with logic programming, where we were talking about logic programming also being a system in which you can specify facts about the world, and then applying the logic rules, it can make deductions or inferences about the world, right? So it's a very old idea, and actually those two camps are actually like overlap quite a bit. Like the idea of AI being powered by these like bags of facts and doing this type of symbolic manipulation of these facts is kind of the very beginning of AI.
Yeah, Prolog is an old language. I forgot if it got started in the 60s or 70s, but like somewhere around there, where people were still trying to figure out like, how do you program? And they took a cue from logic and came up with logic programming languages, and it's surprisingly powerful when it's the right fit for the right problem. And so, but you also have to understand that back then there was no such thing as deep learning or like machine learning as we know it today, because like at that time, computers weren't powerful enough to chew through a whole bunch of data and run statistics on them. And there wasn't that much data. Like at best, they could collect like, I don't know, what would you say? Maybe tens of thousands of data points to train on or something like that. It was tough and expensive. So like that wasn't the approach that people took. So there was a lot of work on symbolic AI in which you were able to represent things about the world and with some symbol in the system. And then through these rules and relationships, you can make inferences and deductions. And so that's where the AI roots that we're talking about. It's not the deep learning stuff that we talked about, say, in the Transformer episode or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. And in the history of AI, these two are sort of warring camps. There's symbolic AI versus statistical machine learning, and these two flavors of AI have each had their peaks and troughs. That is to say that symbolic AI was considered a potential viable approach to building these smart agents, and like you said, symbolic AI runs on these facts, and so the semantic web was in effect a distributed knowledge graph. So a knowledge graph are ways to store knowledge about the world for these symbolic AI agents to run their inferences on. And you can think about all the markup on all of the world's web pages as being this distributed knowledge graph or set of facts.
Yeah, so people figured, well, if people are putting all this data on the web, if only they marked it up, then we could have like a set of facts that people are just publishing in the web, and they're linking them to each other. So if all this stuff was annotated, then we could basically crawl the web as a way to run inferences on the thing. And that's where the idea of the intelligent agents come from. And so you could see technically it would work, maybe. Like I don't know what the latency would be across like doing inference across a network like that, but like at least in theory, it seems like it could be plausible. But
and I think that the approach makes a lot of sense when you think about the fact that the web was growing at this point at a exponential rate. Right, more content was being created day by day by day. Right, and so why not make use of this incredible content generation engine to distribute the work of describing the world? Because the alternative is that some centralized entity would have to collect all the facts about the world in a centralized knowledge graph, and that takes a lot of effort, a lot of human effort, as well as money and other types of resources. And so why not just hand this job over to the people, where everybody describes their own corner of the world, whether that's something about themselves or the business they run, or maybe they even annotate facts about other entities that they have some interest in or something like that.
Yeah, and you'll have to remember that at the time it was unclear why people would do this work in the first place also, and it was like a completely new idea that like there would be a thing called Wikipedia where people would like just write stuff for free, or like people would like voluntarily tag their own stuff, and then you would have like a public repository of other people that tagged other articles the same thing you tagged it as, so you could or people would write stuff on blogs for free and link to other. And so this was kind of the world in which that was happening, and people were really excited, and they're like, oh, it seems like it lines up. Like the only part we're missing is if people would just annotate it with this metadata, then
for machines,
right? For machines,
and fun fact, we haven't mentioned this so far, but the era that you're talking about with the tags and the folksonomy and all of the stuff, Web 2.0, which is where people are writing back and contributing to the web, and then the gap is, of course, that this is not parsable by machines. And so the idea is if you can take Web 2.0 and add annotations for machines, that this would be the Web 3.0. So this was the OG, like original Web 3.0 before its current use in cryptocurrency and things like that.
I'm surprised it took us like 30 minutes to get to the fact that this was the OG Web 3. Like the term died long enough that it got co-opted by the cryptocurrency people, I guess. Like, I don't know, maybe this is like, I don't know, it used to maybe, it was Web 3.0 and people dropped the .0 now.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, I wonder how all the very principled and academic linguists and ontologists and whoever was involved in the original Web 3.0 feel about the Web 3 folks coming and sort of just taking that term and just using it for something that they probably are not big fans of. I don't know.
Well, so how they should feel is they should understand that people in different domains would categorize different things with the same name and vice versa. I mean, that was one of the
That's their
problems.
job, right?
No, I mean, it's one of the things that I think contributed to the complexity of the semantic web, because they assume that everybody would use the same schema, but like people talk about the same thing in different ways depending on your domain. Like the way that you might like categorize things completely is context dependent. And so they should be well aware by now that they would call like Web3 something else. So
right. Yeah, there's no namespace that you can claim like that I own this name.
Yeah. So anyways, so that's kind of I think we spent a lot of time like painting the picture of what the context was like at the time, even though like we're relatively young, so we weren't like in the midst of it then, but like I think we got more than enough of a taste to be able to tell you kind of like what was going on at the time. And so like I think despite the ribbing here, like we understand that like there are a lot of things that seem like they aligned, and so I can see how people go down these sort of paths. So
yeah, we've given the vision a fair shake. It's probably worth by now to start thinking about, well, why didn't this whole thing work, right? And I get the sense, Will, that you in particular have some strong feelings about it. So I don't know. I'll pass it to you. Why do you think it didn't work?
Well, so like, do you like when we did our pre-gaming, like you were wondering if it actually failed? So like I was like, I think it probably pretty much failed. Like, do you get a sense like establishing that in the moment? Because I think there are definitely a lot of things that didn't work about it. Like so, like I think it failed. Did you think it failed?
I think that the implementation, the specific mechanism of action, which is that you allow individual owners of content on the web to mark up facts about the world and use that, to help machines, failed. Like undoubtedly, this is not something that anybody in 2022 or even in 2012 was doing anymore. Like that ship is passed. The market did not take up on this idea. Mm-hmm. I think that I withhold a little bit of criticism, and I'd say that I'll give credit that the vision is still compelling, and I think that we can go over this, later on.
Later, yeah.
That like there are maybe ways that this vision can still be realized, and I think that there are people who are working on this, and so I won't say it's a complete failure, but the specific implementation was a failure.
Yeah, I would say that the vision is still compelling even today, but like definitely the specific implementation is a failure. And going back to your original question, like why do I think that it was a failure, and like why, like what the heck happened? And so I think, I mean, like for any technology adoption, there are definitely plenty of people that would say that, Alan Kay is fond of saying, the guys that did TCP/IP, geniuses, engineers, they knew what they were doing. The people that did the web, schmucks, total amateurs. But it's the easy stuff that gets adopted, a lot of times. And so, I mean, HTML was really forgiving in the beginning, and so people just write whatever crazy ass markup, and browsers would do their best to interpret it rather than crash. And so I think that's one of the things that really helped the adoption of the web, because the authoring tools were or the readers were so forgiving. The readers being the browsers were so forgiving. And so contrast that with this semantic web specifications, like I mentioned earlier, they were like, it's a sprawling number of specifications and it's overly complicated. Like nobody wants to use a tool that can only be fully understood by reading a whole family of specifications. And it doesn't even make sense. And so like a lot of times, like people just want to get stuff done, right? They want to get in, get out, do my thing, get in, get out. But like, you're not going to spend time like reading specification. But I think also in terms of like motivation, we're talking about like motivations of people. I find that a lot of times, or in the beginning, the HTML had tags that affected the appearance or rendering of the thing. And it took a while for people to kind of get used to the idea that the HTML is for the semantics and the CSS is for the presentation. And so we have all
Well,
sorts of tags.
you remember like the one of the early tags of HTML was like the blink tag, right?
Right. Yeah,
So you
yeah.
can see how what they were thinking, at least in the beginning.
Right.
Yeah.
The blink tag and the bold tag still exists. I haven't tried marquee in a long time, but I assume it's still in there somewhere.
Yeah, it's probably still there. Yeah.
Right. And so in that world, I can see how people are way more motivated to bold something if they can see that it changed the appearance of their document. But like, if like you're talking about the semantic markup that's completely invisible, like there's no short-term feedback of like there's no dopamine hit that I did something, right? Basically, you're doing like some sort of like short-term work for unknown long-term gain, because like people didn't exactly have concrete ideas of what exactly intelligent agents would do with this stuff. They were just like, let's just mark up all this stuff first, and then let's figure out the intelligent
Once we
agents.
have the pristine world of facts, then we'll actually provide some value.
Yeah, and so it should have really been the other way around. Like have some like concrete things that people want intelligent agents to do, and then people will like start marking up stuff. And so like outside of that, there's just people are just generally lazy, and it's through no fault of their own. Like you have to be incentivized to do stuff, whether it's ideologically, economically, or something else, right? It's just, I mean, like this laziness of people is bottomless. Like no amount of ease of use will end it, and I don't fault them for it either, right? Like you just, I mean, like the example is actually Cory, what's his doctoro? He's like a writer on the internet about the internet, and he started really early on, and he called it back in like 1999, I think, that like this metadata stuff is meta crap. And so we'll put it in the show notes, but like he just gave all sorts of reasons why it wouldn't work. And he made it a point to go to these like semantic web conferences and just troll those people about like how it wouldn't work. And so I won't go through each of his points or whatever. You can read it. But the short of it was he mostly pointed out to how there was a misunderstanding in the motivation of people and why they would do this sort of thing, and like what people naturally gravitate towards. Like, I just want to get my stuff up there. Like what's the ROI for this thing, right? So I think that's
we were talking as the example of a restaurant owner marking up their web pages and stuff like that. And I don't know too many people who run restaurants, but from what I hear, it's a very stressful job and
low margins.
And a lot of them go out of business. So I'm sure they have a lot on their mind. And the last thing on their mind is doing community service for intelligent agents to do some fancy stuff that doesn't even exist yet, right? Like, why would they want to do that at all? And not just restaurant owners, but just anybody, right? Everybody has jobs to be done. That's what we get paid for. We don't get paid to do community service to help the state of knowledge curation on the web.
Yeah, and that's why I say there's a certain shape to like technological adoption. Like one of the often quoted thing is that like if your new thing is not 10 times better than like whatever it is along some very limited dimension, like people just aren't going to do it. Yeah, and so the core, and I would say like one of the core value props of the semantic web is the interoperability of data on the web. And like I think if aggregation theory by what's his name? Ben Evans?
The Stratechery
guy. Stratechery guy, whatever his name is, was out there then maybe it would be, but like it took a while for us to like see aggregation theory, which I guess we'll put in the show notes also, that what the web provided these companies with was a way to get right next to the customer. So the people that are able to aggregate demand were the ones that are powerful, because in businesses before the web, if you aggregated distribution, you were the one that was powerful. But now that the web flipped that on its head and distribution was free, then the hard part is aggregating demand. And so when you aggregate demand, there's no reason for you to share that content that like everybody is providing to you for free. Like there's just no, like the incentives aren't correct there. And so the web is really has a better affordance for that like aggregation theory than it is for like other things. And so I think that's another thing that kind of was a nail in the coffin for the semantic web, because it didn't align with the affordance of what the web actually was like. And so as a side note, what's interesting about crypto is that you can think of data on the blockchain effectively as a large shared database. And so in some ways, like, it's achieved some of the vision of the semantic web in a roundabout way. Like, definitely they don't quite have tags and stuff like that, but like it's basically public data that people are incentivized, or they don't have a choice really, because like all the data, even data marked as private inside a smart contract, is technically readable and to anybody that really wants to get at it. With the exception
there's
of,
actually an interesting effort tying the semantic web / knowledge graph with cryptocurrency and Web3, which maybe we'll get to when we're talking about like the current state of affairs and things. But I agree though. The blockchain does capture some of that original vision. Yeah.
Although nobody ever talks about it in that specific way, because I think memes are more of a thing nowadays. So we would probably say it in a different way, probably with some cats rocketing to the moon on a Lambo or something like that. So anyways, so I think like all of these things are killer. And as we kind of discussed in the Corba episode, usually with like a specific technology, there isn't one major thing that kills it. Same thing with small talk. Like, usually it's like a confluence of like a misreading of the medium that they're trying to deploy to, along with some sort of like market shape or strategy that they failed to like capture. And it's like death by a thousand cuts. And I think it's the same thing here.
Yeah, I think that it's just a fundamental misalignment with the realities and messiness of the world, right? And it manifests in different ways, whether it's people being lazy or not understanding the economic incentives of content on the web and the move towards walled gardens rather than this utopian open web. Many other things. And I think I would say, you mentioned TCP and it being championed as a pinnacle of technical achievement or whatever.
If you think about K mostly,
if you think about TCP or networking protocols or all of these things that have been achieved through working groups and specifications, the fundamental difference is that the number of implementers for those protocols is limited. So each vendor has to implement those protocols. So in the case of TCP, every operating system, let's say, implements it once in their networking stack, and then everybody else just uses it. And so you only have to get the implementation right maybe 5, 10 times. That's it, right? If you think about the open web and getting everybody to coordinate on a common ontology and a common set of tags and things like that, it's a whole different ballgame, right? I mean, it's possible that there are vendors like WordPress or other web page markup tools that will
help
automatically standardize it. But I think that just there aren't only 5 or 10 of those. There are a lot of tools that people use to write content, and so for all of them to support it, it's a kind of a different scenario than other types of standards.
I don't. No, I know that at one point there were a lot of different OSs, because like people would ship an OS with the machine. So if you bought the machine, you got a different OS. But I think that was like in the 50s, where you have like the IBM System 360 there, and like C hadn't even been invented yet. I think we're not talking about that era, right? For like the TCP/IP stack anyway. So like once things like OSs got mature enough, and then only there were a few survivors, it was a lot easier to kind of get them to agree. But like you said, it would never work with the open web, because the whole idea of an open web is that there would be many people publishing websites, and getting them all to agree on an ontology and a set of standards was going to be difficult without it being overly specified. So to be really specific, I guess.
And the difference also is that TCP is a very, very technical layer of the networking stack. It is something that is well specified in terms of its goals, right? And those are all very technical engineering, software engineering driven goals. But if you move up the networking stack and you get finally to HTTP and the content layer of the networking stack, it actually is a social tool. It's not purely in the realm of technological understanding. It also requires understanding of human beings, and of course, their incentives. And we haven't actually mentioned this so far. Not only are people lazy, people are also going to spam, right? They're going to put fake content. You're going to need content moderation. You can imagine that somebody could make a website for some competitor or somebody that they hate and put like a bunch of fake markup, and then like, what are you going to do? What's the smart agent going to believe? You need some way to basically wrangle conflicting information, fake
Hmm.
information, et cetera, et cetera. And so, yeah, the social aspect is fundamental to the web. And I think that approaching it purely from this ivory tower academic mentality does not bring in the sort of social savvy that is needed when you're dealing with web products. And I think you actually wrote a tweet recently, which I thought was a very very astute, where you said that the Web 3.0 crowd was out of touch with human motivations and incentives, whereas the current Web 3 crowd is very much like that's part of Web 3 and crypto is designing incentive structures, social structures. So this new generation is much more on it than that old guard.
Yeah, like I think if anybody's to take the crown of and title of Web3, it's probably the current crypto crowd because looking beyond the hype and stuff, they're trying to design systems with the correct incentives for a lot of different parties so that the entire thing would work. And because they had to do it from the beginning with an even stronger financial incentive, they've had to like work this stuff out and design what they call token economics. I think
Yeah,
is usually what that. It's not really a field of study. I don't know what you would call
I
it.
think it should
It's
be. I think
yeah.
it will be, but yeah,
Would it fall under economics? I don't know. Economics is supposed to like be able to model people as rational actors, but like yeah, I don't know. Anyways, that's a whole
yeah.
nother thing altogether. But like yeah, the crypto people definitely are way savvier with this sort of stuff. And maybe if they did semantic web from in the late 90s and 2000s, we'd end up with something. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, but you know, I think that's a little bit of an unfair expectation of the Web 3.0 crowd because it wasn't
The
until
original
the
the original
blockchain,
three,
yeah,
the
the
original three. Oh
original
yeah,
Web 3.0 crowd, because it wasn't until smart contracts and cryptocurrency that you could actually have a decentralized economic system for the web. So
yeah.
I think a lot of these semantic web efforts were trying to align people on this, sense of goodwill and,
Hmm.
community contribution, because that's
Yeah.
the only incentive structure that could have existed at that time. There was no
Hmm.
simple way to create financial incentives on the web.
Huh. Then maybe this is a startup. Like listeners out there, get on this because now you have like cryptocurrencies as a tool where like people want to put a lot of effort into making a number go up, and so maybe you can like harness that energy into generating a knowledge graph. I think
Yeah.
it should probably exist. I know
It
somebody
it
out
does
there is
exist.
doing it. Does exist. Yeah.
Yeah. So now I think is the right time to get into it. Yeah. So there's a there's a cool startup called Golden. They were
Uh.
initially going to build a kind of Wikipedia
Uh.
that didn't have as much like high bar of notoriety, right? Where
Yeah.
people there are a lot of people who are famous on the internet, but they're not on Wikipedia because Wikipedia has like very stringent standards. But anyway, so this company Golden is also trying to create a decentralized knowledge graph that incentivizes agents to enter data into the graph. This is from their
Hmm.
website. And so each agent can submit facts to be validated, and if accepted, they will be rewarded tokens. And so that they're directly incentivizing agents, and I guess agents in this case could be human beings, but I suppose it can also be some AI or something like that, to submit facts into their knowledge graph, and then you get economic reward.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess this is the when what is it? Webvan turns into Instacart, and so maybe
Right.
this would be a moment too,
Yeah.
where like the stuff finally works. We'll see, I guess. And so that would be pretty interesting if that was available. But taking a step back before Golden, was there a place in which like a semantic like effort did work before all the cryptocurrency stuff?
So there was a startup called MetaWeb, which was creating a knowledge graph, also an open knowledge graph. So it's different from semantic web in that it wasn't reliant on markup facts on web page structure, but it was similar to semantic web in the idea that everybody collectively curates facts about the world. And MetaWeb eventually got acquired by Google, and now Google uses it extensively to power a lot of their machine learning systems as training data, as well as serving that knowledge graph data to end users. If you are to search in Google Barack Obama height, you will actually get a number. It won't just search the web for instances of Barack Obama's height. It will actually tell you the fact at the top. I think many people are familiar with this by now. And that is powered by querying this knowledge graph, which started out being this open source knowledge graph from this company, MetaWeb.
Do you know if that sort of thing could be encoded inside of a vector space? What do they call it? An embedding. Like, can you just take knowledge graph and just throw it into like a transformer of some sort, and it gets encoded into like this hyperdimensional space and embedding, and you don't have to worry about it again?
Yeah, so I think that actually things are moving in the different direction. What people are realizing with transformers is that a lot of these big transformer models like the GPT-3 and whatnot, they basically read the entire internet and then, like you mentioned, kind of encode all of the knowledge that they read into their weights of the machine learning model.
Right.
But of course, this is a pretty lossy process because they have to pack in a lot of information into this sort of floating point space.
The embedding is by nature lossy. Like, in order to compress it, like part of intelligence is knowing what to throw away. So like by nature, like intelligence is compression. So
yeah, exactly. And so things are actually moving in the opposite direction, where people are researching increasingly, can we make transformer models that access a structured knowledge graph to refer to certain things, so that when you ask a transformer like GPT-4 maybe in the future to tell you facts about the world, rather than it just like conjuring up facts from its memory/imagination, it will actually be able to reference some database or knowledge graph and say, okay, I've pulled the actual pertinent fact, and then I will include that fact in my response. And so it's a way to maybe have more factually accurate output from transformers. And so yeah, things are moving more towards that direction actually.
Oh, that's kind of interesting, because like I know that when you ask GPT-3 math questions like 2 + 2 or 4 + 4, like it has a hard time with that actually, because like what it's doing is trying to traverse the embedding space to find like what comes after. Like, yeah, it doesn't do well in that. And so I guess that would be an instance in which you would want the transformer to look up stuff in a structured database of some sort to give you an answer back.
Yeah.
Weird. Okay. Anyways, I didn't. That's a tangent. If those of you that want to go back to our transformer episode and learn about transformers all at a high level, just pause this video and go to the other one, or finish.
No, watch this full video.
So that right. What am I doing? Right. I want the engagement. So, anyways. So then MetaWeb seems to be driving a lot of the search of facts on Google. Were there other instances of successful semantic web things in a limited fashion? Because we know that at large it kind of failed.
I think you and I have talked about this just in the course of normal conversation, but I think the only one that is popular are the open graph tags. So these are the tags that when you write a blog post or something that you want like shared on the internet, when you paste a link, for example, into Twitter or Facebook to share with your friends, it'll pull the title of the article, a little blurb, and then maybe a thumbnail, right? And all of that is actually powered by a very light type of semantic web markup called Open Graph.
Yeah, and this goes back to what I was saying before, that if you write invisible markup, like people just aren't incentivized to put that in there. But if you put invisible markup that helps you with your distribution, then all of a sudden you're like, I want those fancy looking cards of my website to show up in these search listings, then I'm going to put some of that in there. And that's an example of having the intelligent agent coming up with some sort of like use case that people want in the first place. Then they're willing to mark it up. And in fact, I wonder why like more companies don't use markups as part of their API and API documentation, especially if their users, well, I guess maybe part of the reason nowadays is that most users don't write markup anymore, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe in the days when people had their own blogs, you could do it. Because right now, a lot of people just, well, they either write on Twitter or they post on Facebook, and neither one of those allows you to write markup. But I guess in the days of blogs, it would make sense that if you want your users to be able to use a particular service, then either you have them generate the tags or you yourself, like say WordPress generates the tags for you. and then you would be able to do that. So I don't know, to eat my own dog food would be a good example.
Yeah.
I guess if you want distribution for your blog post, I mean that's kind of similar. Or like, yeah, I can't come up with anything off the top of my head.
maybe that's why it failed.
Right.
Even if you try, you can't come up with good
No,
ideas
I
for
mean,
this.
like, put on the spot, I'll just come up with like dumb things that will come back to haunt me because these episodes presumably will be here for years and years, and I'm gonna have to look back at all the stupid things that I said.
Yeah.
So yeah, so then it seems like there are parts of the semantic web that worked pretty well, but I think it's still far from the vision of the intelligent agents. So how do you surmise that we can get there? Because like I would like intelligent agents to help like make appointments, or like the equivalent of a travel agent, because I can't tell you like how great it was in the beginning of the web when you could find deals and bing bam boom, you just book a flight, book a hotel, and you're on your way. But now that like the hotel and airline industry have figured this out, they put all sorts of dark patterns, and you spend a lot of time like comparing this with that and trying to subtract out their fees or not have fees. It's just it takes hours again. And so I would like it if there was an intelligent agent to kind of set that stuff up for me, given the constraints that I give it, right?
Yeah. I think that part of the vision still remains very compelling. I would say that now we're at a state of AI, going back to the symbolic AI versus statistical machine learning, the pendulum has clearly swung in favor of statistical machine learning, of which transformers are a descendant or an instance. And so transformers are excellent at understanding natural language. That's what they were built to do. And so now I don't see the need for semantic agents to consume structured markup. I think it's possible that you can just unleash these smart agents that are based on transformers, and they're able to parse what's already user visible. So they can parse natural language and be able to maybe take action on that. And so rather than the restaurant owner, going back to our canonical example, doing all this extra work, you could take a transformer model and say, here is this input web page. Can you parse it and tell me, do they serve a particular dish in their menu? Or what time do they close? Are they open on Sundays? And it will just be able to answer that from the user visible, human readable text on the web page as it is.
How would you control false positives or false negatives? I mean, because like these statistical methods have an error rate built into them. Unlike like if you're looking at structured data, if it's there, it's there. If it's not, then it's not. And so how would that work? I guess the agent would come up with a list of steps, kind of like how SQL has an explain command to say how did I get here. And so I guess you as a human would approve all the steps that it came up with. And so you can kind of double check, I guess if you wanted to, that the price was actually that, and kind of have a human in the loop to approve at the very end.
Yeah, I think that's going to be an important part of it. If you're talking about semantic agents that are actually performing some action, right? Like, okay, I'm going to book a flight based on some price that it parsed out of flights.
Because as we know on Amazon, every once in a while they'll try to sell like, I don't know, a Nintendo Wii for like $30,000 just because there's some glitch in their system for pricing, right?
Yeah, right.
So you don't want to be caught up in just paying $30,000 for one of those things.
Yeah, exactly. So I think
due to your intelligent agent. Due to your intelligent agent, right? Because like in the financial world, you have all these like agents that do the trading for you, and people have lost like hundreds of millions of dollars because they decided to run one of these things with a bug in it. And I don't know who gets fired over that sort of stuff, but like that's what did they lose? Like it was in the hundreds of millions. I forgot the exact thing. Kevlin Henney likes to harp on this point. If I'll find it and put it in the show notes.
Cool. Yeah. I think another step towards these transformer-based intelligent agents is that currently the transformer-based natural language models don't know how to tell you, I don't know. More often than not, if you ask a question, they'll just make up something.
Yeah, right? They'll just make up something.
And so I think that increasingly there are research efforts into grounding these models, which means that they refer to external sources, like we mentioned, whether that is a database or knowledge graph or just a set of web pages that it has retrieved from a search engine. And then the grounding part is making the model aware that it is referencing a specific information that it's reading somewhere, or if it's unable to find that information, it being sort of self-aware enough to say, yeah, I don't know, I couldn't find that information for you, rather than just like making some stuff up.
Huh, that's interesting because like the use cases where you want AI to help you generate like fiction or like movies or something like that, I guess
Yeah.
you don't want to ground them in anything, so they come up with all sorts of crazy ass things. But I guess if you want like a booking agent, then yeah, you want them to be grounded in some sort of reality there.
Right. Yeah. So I think that, intelligent agents that consume knowledge from the open web still feasible. I think that the technology has caught up on that end. So yeah, I think it could be possible. And then I think, if and that's coming at it from make the agents be able to parse
Yeah.
unstructured data. And I think, like, of course, we mentioned efforts like Golden and maybe other cryptocurrency efforts where you can think about the possibility that we're actually going to do this with structured data, but then properly incentivizing people in order to actually moderate and curate the set effects about the world.
Yeah, so I was going to mention that, and I'm glad we're on the same wavelength here. Like, what are the economic incentives that would help encourage the adding of correct factual data to this knowledge graph and dissuade, I guess, spammers? I guess that's a large question that would be bigger than this episode, but I guess it's just an open question thinking out loud.
Yeah, I think that there needs to be some compelling reason for people to want to add data into the knowledge graph. I'm thinking that,
well, making money would be one, I guess.
Yeah, making money would be one. But I mean, ultimately, like, okay, then the network can be doling out tokens to people, but at the end of the day, it also has to provide some inherent value to the world. Right? I'm thinking, like, what value would it provide? Where are these tokens deriving their fundamental value?
Yeah,
right?
like what are they? What's the word based on? There's a specific financial term for it. Backed by. What are they backed by?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that can we get a knowledge graph that is expansive as Wikipedia, that says all kinds of facts about the entire world? Yeah, maybe. I mean, the Golden folks are trying to do that, certainly. But
so like there are parts of the web where like people do that without financial incentives. I mean, like people list like every episode of, I don't know, Game of Thrones and annotate like every time that people get killed or like, I don't know, whatever, like all sorts of stuff. Like fandom is like a huge thing, and they just put out these, or like if you ever like played Minecraft and look at the Minecraft wiki, like it's just so detailed. Like who spends all their time? Well, I mean, kids and college students, they have plenty of time to do all of this sort of stuff.
I mean, the idea of fandom actually is very relevant here, because I've so far been thinking about the idea that the incentives have to be backed by some type of economic value, right? Some
for a certain class of things, right? But I'm saying, like, when we were talking about like the universe of knowledge stuff, like there's some things that are very well tuned to economic incentives, and then the other stuff is well tuned to like fandom, right?
Yeah, but the interesting thing about crypto Web3 is that increasingly there are tokens and measures of value that are measures of social value, not just economic value. So I can imagine if you are a member of some fandom, then you're annotating in this knowledge graph like all of the when some Game of Thrones character died, and then you got paid in Game of Thrones coin or whatever, and that shows that you're like super expert in that thing. Maybe people would want to do that.
Only if there are people that admire you for having that badge. Whether like, I guess
which I assume other Game of Thrones people maybe, right? Like, be like, wow, you have so many GOT coins or whatever.
Yeah, like a status symbol amongst them, or like for love interests of whatever gender you're into, like are into that, then that might be a thing too. Yeah, it's interesting. There's a whole subfield of NFTs that are all about these sort of like social token sort of stuff, and like I can imagine them doing this sort of stuff. But then how about what?
Oh, I was thinking that. Imagine that the creator of Game of Thrones has an NFT whose price is entirely denominated in Game of Thrones coin, and the only way that you could buy that NFT is by earning Game of Thrones coins through doing this type of community service. Then you'd be able to buy something cool.
Yeah, there's some like you'd have to consider a lot of different angles because like normally these tokens can be traded on exchanges. So does it
Yeah.
matter if you can earn these tokens and then trade it to somebody? Like maybe that's just part of the work and it doesn't really matter who ends up with the reward. Like maybe I mean if people are
Yeah.
willing to grind World of Warcraft for some like gold in order to make a living, then maybe this is a perfectly adequate way to earn a living also. Like
Yeah.
you don't care about Game of Thrones, but you're willing to do the work so that actual Game of Thrones fans don't have to.
Yeah. I
Maybe.
mean that's how specialization in economics work, right?
Right, right, right.
Like you kind of delegate responsibility to whoever is willing to do it. Yeah.
So then what about the stuff in the middle? Because there's like a whole class of things where like it's not exactly motivized by economics, but then like it's not motivized by fandom either. Like what's an
Yeah.
example of that? What are
Just
people
like
not fans of? Like
boring things like
that has
paved
nothing to do with
roads.
business.
Like yeah, like what are the names of the streets in a city or something, something like
But
that.
you have like those OpenStreetMap fans. Maybe you can
Yeah.
find fans for most anything. It's
For
just
anything.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean there are people who like uh, buy very complicated equipment to track planes, like the location of
Yeah.
planes and things, and like they maintain those websites. So there's like I think
Yeah.
anything actually. Can you? And maybe the hypothesis is you can create a fandom for anything, even supposedly like very boring things.
Yeah, I mean, people track trains and like their websites devoted to like which train came on which railroad at which hour and stuff like that.
Yeah. So yeah, but no, but I mean I agree. I think that's a bit of an extreme. Like certainly there are some fascinating things that seem boring to people, but then are very interesting to a subset of people. But yeah, I think there are definitely going to be some things that are just straight up boring slash like they're not a hobby of anybody. Like yeah, whatever. Like what is the density of like various materials in the world? And like I don't even know if there are any big
Yeah.
density fans. Somebody
Yeah,
needs to
yeah,
put
yeah,
that
yeah.
into the
Like I was
market.
hard pressed. Like before the
Yeah.
internet came up, I would be like, "There's a whole huge class of things that people find completely boring." But then now that having lived on the internet for 2 decades, I'm like, "Yeah, I'm hard pressed to think of stuff." Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
like the specific heat of different materials or something. I don't
Yeah.
know, but yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah, so there's probably going to be gaps, and then maybe
Maybe that's where
that
yeah, just yeah, I don't know what it is.
you either don't have it, or you some entity in whose interest it is to kind of maintain the completeness
completely
of
the
this
same.
graph.
Yeah,
Yeah, they actually pay people like real money to collect this
yeah,
kind of boring data or something like that.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, also, I think there's an opportunity for agents who are not humans, so AI agents, to maybe parse this information from web pages and other content on the web, and then submit it to the graph for money. So you can have like AI agents. Your favorite idea is AI agents
Yeah.
that can hold their own and make their own money and whatever. And like
Right.
this is a job
Buy an
that maybe
apartment and own a
yeah.
dog and eventually apply for citizenship. Yeah, yeah, I'm all
Yeah,
for
exactly.
that.
So one path for that is AI agents that are doing the boring work that humans don't want to do and filling in all the gaps in the knowledge graph.
Yeah, and there's probably a like whole nother tangent we can go to into like adversarial agents that are injecting these things, or like if there are political like state actors that are trying
Yeah.
to do that. Yeah, recently I've been listening to a lot of Frontline Putin and his like misinformation campaign. I'm like, oh, okay, like that. I kind of understand some of the dynamics there, and definitely like the adversarial actors definitely throw a wrench into these sort of efforts if it is a means of uh, control and a way to hold on to political power for these parties. So
Yeah. Well, actually, I wanted to ask you about this because you've actually worked in this. Like, there are crypto Web3 structures where you can basically moderate information. And I'm thinking of TCRs, like token curated
right,
registries, right? And
right.
like, do you think that technology is a viable way to maintain moderation in a knowledge graph?
I think the difficult part of the TCRs was that so TCRs, just to explain to our listeners real quick, it stands for token curated registries. Basically, it's like a top 10 list that are maintained by people that are incentivized by earning tokens. So you can imagine like I don't know, like a list of best restaurants in the Bay Area or something like that, or like
Mm-hmm.
the list of presidents. And so in the first one, it's more opinion based, and the second one is more factual. And so I think the difficulty when I was working on it was that there are some things that are factual that align very well with it being clear as to what belonged on the list or not. And so it was easy to figure out how to incentivize and punish and dissuade those people from like putting crap on the list. But like those kinds of facts are actually few and far between. Like even things that we consider facts can be viewed differently by different people. Like a good case in point is like geography. There's so many contested parts of the world geographically that like people would have different versions of the list, and they would be incentivized to effectively be bad actors for that. And so does it make sense that the largest token holders would effectively dominate? Because the assumption there is that if they have earned those tokens, then they did good work previously to maintain that list. But if you have the same token across different types of lists, just because one person did a good job curating one list doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to do a good job curating a different set of facts. And then also, one of the things about Web3 and cryptocurrencies is that some of these tokens are fungible so that you can trade them to other people. So does it make sense that you could trade the things that you earn by curating a good list to other people that haven't necessarily done that work? And then if it can't be tradable, like how can you have a transfer of value? And so there were a lot of these difficult questions that we weren't able to answer in the short time that we were like looking into the space and working on it. And so I think there's some version of this that will work, because all the buzzy things that you hear on the cryptocurrency stuff, like they've been around for a long time. Like people in cryptocurrency don't just come up with a new thing to scam you out of your money every time. So like NFT's been around for a while, and then like people found it, figured out what it was for, and applications, and then it kind of blew up. Like they just invented to scam people out of their money. Same thing with DAOs. Like DAOs like failed and crashed significantly, had a kind of a short winter for like maybe 2 or 3 years before they came back like recently, where people are interested in them again. And I think it would be the same for TCRs. It's just I don't know exactly what that looks like, because as I've outlined, like there's a couple issues with like how it would actually work, because even things that are factual can be nuanced, especially when you have different parties. It goes back to the problem that like the people in the semantic web didn't address. Like different people have different views and schemas on the same sort of thing. And so how do you deal with that? Maybe versioning TCRs is one thing, or like everybody that believes the same kind of thing can have their own TCR, and you as a reader would be able to merge or pick and choose from them. So you could draw from various different sources to get a corroborated list sort of thing. So it doesn't matter that for one particular topic, such as like what are the best restaurants in the Bay Area? So maybe all sorts of different groups would maintain that list, and you would read it and then give different weights to these different lists to come up with your own list when you're reading them. So that sort of thing. That's a little bit of a long answer, I guess, for a podcast about like semantic web. But I guess TCRs are the crypto version of the semantic web, except they call it a list rather than a graph. But you could presumably just link these lists together in order to get a knowledge graph. So I mean, look out for it. TCRs.
TCRs for the semantic web. You hear it first.
Buzzworthy. Yeah. Get on it, listeners. This is another startup, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Yeah, I mean, this is another episode that I think I was not expecting us to go on as long as we have, but I think that this is a very, very influential, I guess, topic, or rather it is steeped in a lot of other related topics. It relates to AI, it relates to the rise of the web, it relates to humans and incentive structures and things like that. And so obviously we've explored all those different paths, and I think that, I mean, it's an interesting problem space. Like I think that many careers and companies and things could be made off of maybe parceling off some subset of the vision of semantic web and then getting it right.
Yeah, like I have to admit, like maybe you and I just bring out both the chattiness, the best and the worst of each of us, so that's why we go on and on about things. But yeah, like before, when I was all ready to say like this is dead, there's nothing of value here, like move on, there's nothing here to see. But like after chatting, I'm like, oh okay, like definitely I think there's just something here that you need to kind of dig out, because like right now semantic web is just unfashionable, and so that's why like people aren't looking at it or working on it. But I think like there's a gem of something in here, like after we kind of talked about it, and I think that's what I'm getting at, that like you really
it's like a diamond in the rough kind of thing.
Yeah, because people like threw it in the mud. I was gonna say something else, but yeah, like I think there's something to be dusted off there, because like I said, I was originally going to just kind of write it off completely. There's like a core of something there that is useful. Like forget all the implementation that came before. Like that's probably not it, but like there's a gem of something there.
Yeah, I think we've done a few of these retro tech episodes now in the season, and let us know what you think about retro future episodes. We can maybe consider continuing doing them.
Oh yeah, out to that one user that commented along while he was reading. I'm sorry, I forgot your name, but we definitely appreciate that. So like anybody that has insightful comments, either corrections or otherwise, let us know. And yes, please, insightful comments only, otherwise it would make us very sad.
Yes.
So,
yeah, so I think we've done a few of these retro episodes, and I think that there are two types of retro that we've covered. You can think about Corba, where we said, well, that was a flaming pile of garbage and nobody should ever go in that direction ever again. And then on the other one is, for example, Smalltalk, where it was like, well, it failed, but like there's a lot of conceptual value here to still be mined. And my take after this conversation is that the semantic web is closer to the Smalltalk end of the spectrum and not on the Corba end of the spectrum.
But you have to dust off. I think you'd have to dust. For me, it sits a little bit in the middle. You have to dust off a lot of the implementation stuff and just throw it away. But like go for like what was the aspiration or like the core vision, and see like based on the advantage of having 20 years of being in the future, that you can look back and see how you can improve upon the vision based on the future technology that you have today.
Yeah, totally. Well, with that, we have talked to everybody's ear off at this point, and so we hope you enjoyed learning about this. It's a very fascinating topic, and with that, we are closing out the season 2 of the Technium.
Oh yeah, it's season 2 is done. Can you believe it? That's crazy. It just seemed to fly by. We were just having too much fun. But yeah, I'm glad that we were able to close it out on a positive note. Well, semi-positive, but generally saying thumbs up. So that's good. So to our viewers, if you please subscribe. What was the phrase that we have? We still don't have an outro, even though we have an intro. What do we say?
Yeah. You always say Shalaka subscribe.
Yeah, I got that from Felicia Day, but Shalaka subscribe or something like that. Share, like, and subscribe. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and also, like Will said, definitely comment along. It's actually really fun for us to have people to interact with, because otherwise it just feels like we're shouting into the void. So we're glad that we have listeners who are commenting, and we hope to hear from you more.
Yeah, and so we, at the end of season 2, we're going to be on a small hiatus for a couple of weeks, prepping for our season 3, which will be bigger, faster, stronger, with more production improvements. And so we hope to see you there at next season, in season 3. Sri, do you have anything to say to our listeners in anticipation for season 3?
We are going to be taking a hiatus, but between now and season 3, we are going to try to put out some more digestible pieces of content, summarizing little clips of the interesting moments of our best episodes. And so stay subscribed. We still have plenty more to share with you.
Right. Yeah. So because as the internet says, ain't nobody got time to listen to an hour and 30 minutes of two guys rambling all the time. So we'll make some more digestible pieces. So with that, I got nothing else. What about you?
No, that's it. Yeah. Cool. All right. Thanks for listening. See ya.
Yeah. And so this is Will.
And this is Sri.
See you next season. Bye-bye.